You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm James Reinl, and we're taking a look at the pro-democracy movement in Bahrain. Abdulhadi al-Khawaja is not giving up the fight for more political rights on the Gulf island. The jailed hunger striker says he will stick to his fast despite this week's court-ordered review of his conviction and life sentence. His case has become a focal point in the struggle of Bahrain's Shiite Muslim majority, who complain of discrimination under a Sunni monarchy. At least 50 people have died in unrest in Bahrain since the Arab Spring reached the oil-rich island in February last year. The Al Khalifa royal family promises reform. Many Shiites say it is too little, too late, and continued protesting throughout the recent Formula One Grand Prix. Bahrain is indeed a complicated place. The religious demographic means it fits uneasily in a region dominated by Shiite-run Iran and Sunni-led Saudi Arabia. It also hosts the US Fifth Fleet, a crucial asset were Tehran to come good on its promise to close the Gulf oil shipping route. So, is the Bahraini government seriously undertaking reform or just window dressing? Are Western countries hypocritical for trumpeting human rights in some Arab countries, but not in Bahrain? And is it conceivable that a Gulf monarchy could offer anything even resembling a Western-style democracy? To probe these questions, we're hosting a discussion in our London studios. I'm joined by Fahad al-Banali, a spokesman for the Bahrain government, Rodney Shakespeare, chairman of the Committee Against Torture in Bahrain, Mike Dibble, a Middle East pro-democracy campaigner, Ben Harris Quinney, chairman of the conservative think tank The Bow Group, and Patrick Henningsen from the alternative news website Infowars. Okay, gentlemen, to get the ball rolling, I'd like to get a single sentence answer from each of you to the following question. First of all, to you, Rodney, is the Bahraini government seriously interested in reform?
No, all it does is use money to bribe people and to get the services of the public relations agencies. It's a corrupt autocratic regime with no long-term future.
Okay, Mike.
No, it is not dedicated to reform. In my belief, meaningful reform can only take place once fundamental political changes have happened in Bahrain. Anything else is pure window dressing.
Farhad, I'll let you get in there.
I disagree. I think the scale, degree and transparency of the reforms presented by the Bahraini government, they speak for themselves. Genuine intention is there. What has been done, what needs to be done, significant steps have been taken, so I don't see how people can see that as window dressing.
Okay, and Ben?
Well, we have to remember that all governments that have come under the strain of the Arab Spring have promised reform, including Gaddafi. So it's not necessarily something to be taken completely seriously. However, I think there is evidence of incremental reform in Bahrain in the context of Bahrain itself, but certainly not by any Western standards that could be applied.
Okay, and finally over to you, Patrick.
I think the important thing to look at with Bahrain is, as a sovereign state, as a monarchy, petrol dictatorship, they're allowed to do whatever they want. The problem that I have, and a lot of people that my readers have, is that they can't have any moral soapbox to stand on in terms of being a member of the Arab League and telling Syria they need to reform when they themselves are an autocratic regime and nothing near democracy.
Okay, maybe to start this conversation off, I'd like to go back a little bit and look at the demographic nature of Bahrain and maybe try and tease out what are the source of the tensions that have erupted not only in the past year, but of course there have been protests in previous years. Maybe I'll start with Rodney. How do you analyse the situation in Bahrain?
It's purely about democracy faced by a feudal, vicious, spiteful regime. The Democrats are, in fact, consist of all groups and all religions, and it's really part of the Arab Spring. The UK position is totally outdated. It has no long-term interest to maintain in Bahrain. It and the USA should get out of the Persian Gulf.
Okay, and maybe turn over to you, Mike, because you lived in Bahrain. Maybe you can give us an insight into the lives of an ordinary Shiite person there and a Sunni person, and is it just a sectarian split?
I think the sectarian issue is a bit of a diversion. Clearly there's a religious or ethno-sectarian dimension to it, but I prefer to see it as an issue of democratisation versus dictatorship. In terms of the distribution of wealth, I would say that the majority of Shiites, of course there are wealthy Shiites and there are poor Sunnis, but as a generalisation I would say it is probably comparable to the situation in terms of social marginalisation and sectarian imposed glass ceilings, probably comparable to the situation suffered by the Roman Catholic minority in Northern Ireland during the 70s and 80s. So yes, the sectarian issue is relevant, but dwelling on it and sort of playing it out as if it's purely Sunni Saudi and Shia Iran, I think is a little bit of a distortion, and it takes us away from how those differences in wealth and access to opportunities are felt by ordinary people on the ground.
Now, Farhad, turning to you at this stage, because this is something that the government recognises, that there are social and economic problems in Bahrain and they need to be addressed. But how do you analyse what they really are?
There are social and economic problems in every society, but to allege that these are a result of systematic discrimination is actually, I think, unfounded. Secondly, I just would like to come to the point about speaking of Bahrain as a feudal, barbaric, and out-of-date democracy. That is just completely untrue. I mean, it's a very simplistic understanding of the region and the way that governments are formed. We've made our transition towards democracy 10 years ago. That move was supported by a referendum where 98.4% of voters agreed for. Women have universal suffrage. They have a presence in parliament. We've got women ministers and ambassadors and everything. We've got a bicameral parliament. People accuse it of being powerless, but recently in January, the House of Representatives, the lower house, refused a decree by law from the king. I mean, that shows significant powers in parliament. Let us not, look at these things superficially and present this whole situation as a large majority demanding rights and a small group of elites denying them. I think that's, at best, very superficial.
Well, the 98% turnout for the referendum makes me suspicious.
Approval rating, not
classic
turnout.
rhetoric of dictatorships. I think Saddam had those kinds of things as well, didn't he?
But just a small comment. I mean, that number, even members of the opposition have not refused. I think it's a very lazy stance and a lazy argumentative standpoint to dismiss every positive move as window dressing and an effect to make a dictatorship look better. Look at the situation on the ground. Evaluate those measures themselves.
Torture and killing, full stop.
No, the government of Bahrain does not support torture of any kind. It supports torture. That is the exact spirit. Let me complete. That is the exact spirit why the BICI report, the Independent Commission of Inquiry's report, was published in a very public ceremony, its foundings presented before the king, and its results available online in Arabic and English. I mean, those are not superficial point of view, and these are not things that are, indicative of a support for torture, of any misuse of, or mistreatment of any kind. The Economist said that no other Arab leader has voluntarily opened his government to such public scrutiny. I mean, do you marginalize the step as just mainly window dressing?
Maybe I'm going to turn to Ben Harris-Quinney at this stage, because on the one side, we've got a perception of a feudal, vicious and spiteful regime. On the other side, Bahrain is being presented as a progressive country that is embracing reforms. Now, from what you were saying earlier, it would seem that you think that there's something a bit more nuanced going on here.
As with any situation, it is a very complex one. But I think there have been some good points made. The notion that a constitutional monarchy is presented here is slightly difficult to believe because I think it's actually true that the king's uncle is prime minister. I don't think that's a great example of democracy. However, we have to come to the situation not from necessarily a Western perspective, but from a regional and Middle East perspective. And therefore, it's not necessarily the case that we can decry all incremental moves towards democracy. Yes, there are issues in Bahrain. No, none of those structures of government would be acceptable in Europe. However, there is a process to change. And unless we are going to intervene, as we did in Libya, I think we've simply got to be supportive of that.
I'd just like to add as a point of clarification that Khalifa al-Khalifa, the king's uncle, has been continuously in power for 41 years since Bahrain obtained its independence from the UK in 1971, and he's never undergone any kind of electoral process.
Western standards, that's not a democracy.
Yeah.
Patrick, can I ask you to throw something in here?
I personally don't support military intervention in places like Libya, nor do I support it in Syria. But the problem with Bahrain is the conflict of interest. The Bahraini government and the leadership will do what it likes, and it will not be censured or slapped on the wrist by the West or have the likes of Hillary Clinton parachuting in to give any moral speeches, because Bahrain toes the line when it comes to British and U.S. foreign policy objectives. As long as the leadership does that, the police can do whatever they want. There's videos of drive-by shootings I've seen. Bahraini police just drive-by shootings in neighborhoods, come in a caravan and just start popping people and driving off. I mean, if that's a civilized country, Fahad, that's how your police deal with things. Now, I have to ask Fahad, are the police in your country, are they actually Bahraini, or are they like in Saudi Arabia? Are they foreign nationals?
Fahad, you can answer that.
I'd like to take that question from the beginning. Now, let us not go with a too loose definition of protest. The right to protest is guaranteed here in Bahrain by constitution and by international obligations. We've had large protests during the Formula One that went on without a hitch, drawing thousands of people. A march on March 9th drew about 50,000 plus that went out without incident. I'm sure everybody following the Bahrain story have seen people violently assaulting policemen. That is where the line is drawn. That is where peaceful expression crosses over to violent expression and rioting. A White House statement was recently released. It acknowledged that members of the police forces were critically injured. Of the 35 deaths mentioned in the Independent Commission's report, 5 of them were members of the security forces. Let us look at the context of the situation, delve deeper. Don't just look at slogans and oversimplify, what is a very complicated situation.
Fahad, many people in your country call your police mortazaqa, mercenaries. Can you explain to the rest of the world why that word's used?
Those are the hardliners. Many members of the opposition actually acknowledge that they are members of the police force, national Bahrainis. But to call them mortazaqa, to call them mercenaries, basically opens the line to violence. You have people who don't see those as fellow Bahrainis, don't see those as members of the security forces tasked with maintaining law and order, and actually go on actively assaulting them, be it with Molotov cocktails or improvised metallic rods that do serious injury.
When you say they're Bahrainis, do you mean that they were born and bred in Bahrain, or do you mean that they were recently brought into the country under the Tajnis, the political naturalisation programme, to shift the ethno-sectarian balance of the country in the regime's favour?
That is an allegation I don't support. We have many Bahrainis here.
You don't have Tajnis?
Listen, let me just answer the question. You have many Bahrainis here who have been born here and raised. You have other Bahrainis who have come here. We have many Bahrainis from Iranian origin who have immigrated here after the Iranian Revolution, who have built businesses, houses, and families.
I'm talking about the ones in the police.
To draw such a thick and arbitrary line to say who is Bahraini and who isn't goes against that whole understanding of, being united as Bahrainis first, then delving deeper into the other things. We have this divide here now because people are drawing arbitrary lines and, setting incorrect criteria on what it is to be Bahraini and what isn't. But I also want to add something about the question of reform.
Fahad, please answer the question. Are the Bahraini police, what is the ethnic makeup of the Bahraini police? Are they foreign nationals or are they Bahraini natural-born citizens?
The makeup of the Bahraini police force is representative of Bahraini society. We have, that is all I can say to this. Which is, look at the makeup of Bahraini society. It won't be foreign. It won't be out of place. And
what is the makeup of the Bahraini police? Is 50% Bahraini, 50% foreign national? Give me an answer, please.
I am not a member of the Ministry of Interior, but I am telling you, and this is an answer, that the members of the security forces, their makeup is representative of Bahraini society.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm James Reinl, and we're taking a look at the pro-democracy movement in Bahrain. I'm joined by Fahad al-Banali, a spokesman for the Bahrain government, Rodney Shakespeare, chairman of the Committee Against Torture in Bahrain, Mike Dibble, a Middle East pro-democracy campaigner, Ben Harris-Quinney, chairman of the conservative think tank The Bow Group, and Patrick Henningsen from the alternative news website Infowars. Okay, at this moment, I'd like to turn to the case of Abdul Hadi al-Khawaja. He is the Bahraini who is in prison at the moment on a hunger strike, more than 80 days into a hunger strike, during which he's lost approximately 25% of his body weight, according to his family. He was convicted by a military court last year on charges of terrorism, seeking to overturn the system of government and collaborating with a foreign state, which is understood to mean Iran. An appeals court this week ruled that there will be a case review of the case of al-Khawaja and 20 others. At this moment, I'd like to play an audio clip from the wife of al-Khawaja, who says that even though this review has been ordered, he won't be giving up his hunger strike.
He was telling me that my hunger strike is not for negotiation. I'm not going to stop until I'm free, either by death or by coming out of jail. I'm not going to stop. I think the government is assassinating my husband in a very slow and painful way.
Fahad, it seems you're getting all the time on the mic here, but I've got to put that one first to you. The government is assassinating her husband in a very slow and painful way.
That is absolutely not true. Since the beginning, we've regularly reported on Abdul Hadi al-Khawaja's case. He has access to the best medical attention 24/7. He has been granted access to independent doctors, one of them being Danish. He is visited regularly by the Danish ambassador, and he is also visited regularly by his family. He has also been recently interviewed by the BBC, who clarified the situation. So let us not jump to exaggeration. I mean, it is an emotional, I think, experience for his family. Granted, yes, but let us not jump to such conclusions and make serious allegations when the truth on the ground is different, as evidenced by the regular visits, the reports, and the recent interview on the BBC.
And would you say that the review of his case, I mean, that is a step in the right direction? That is a step on the reforms that you're talking about?
Yes, the Independent Commission's report stated that, the government was quick to react to the demands of the protesters with the Crown Prince's initiative for dialogue, a dialogue that the Independent Commission's report stated could have led to significant political, economic, and social reforms and constitutional reforms, and would have avoided most of the negative impact of, the subsequent event, was rejected by the opposition, mainly because, and this is stated on the report, that they thought they could make more gains through the street. Now, this is unfortunate. Reform cannot come unilaterally, and, we've had a year of rejections. The opposition has rejected joining the national dialogue, which now, based on the points of consensus there, we're actually going to have constitutional amendments. They've passed through both houses of parliament. They've refused to, after resignation or resigning from parliament, they've refused to join the by-elections, and many more. I mean, yes, there are tensions arising, but you can only open the door to dialogue and leave it open and encourage people to join in. But you cannot move forward with the attitude of reject, boycott, or withdraw.
On the case of al-Khawaja, that's what the Bahraini government says. The human rights groups say there's no evidence against him, that he should be released. The UN says that he should be transferred to a civilian hospital. Mike, what's your view of the Khawaja case?
Clearly he's a prisoner of conscience and should be released. The charges were trumped up. This is the view of Amnesty International, that called the military tribunal that sentenced him a sham. The US State Department came close to saying something similar last week, and I think even the UK FCO is beginning to wake up on that issue. But I'd like to ask Fahad about Abdul Hadi's force feeding. Apparently he was force fed to prevent him dying in the immediate aftermath of the Formula One debacle. I was wondering if you'd like to comment on Abdul Hadi's force feeding, which, as I understand it, can be seen as a form of torture.
No, that is not true. In a recent interview on Hard Talk, the Minister of Justice stated that going into hunger strike is Abdul Hadi al-Khawaja's right, and going out of it is his choice. Now, I know you won't take my word for it, so please take the word of the BBC. A few days ago, it was reported by the BBC, Frank Gardner, based on his conversation with the Danish ambassador on the health of Abdul Hadi al-Khawaja, they reported that he has occasionally taken such things as fruits. And on their report recently, after visiting him at the hospital and having an interview with him, they said that he drank coffee. They said, and I quote on the BBC, that he's been having a managed intermittent hunger strike. This is why we've always affirmed that his condition is stable. And there is testimony to this from the BBC's reporting, from the independent medical's report, and that kind of thing. So to allege that he's been mistreated in any way, which he has not stated when offered. He has not complained to the Danish ambassador. He has not complained to the BBC.
Point made. Let's let Rodney get back in there.
Farhad, I've had enough of this. You are a creepy, crawly spokesman for a regime which tortures doctors for helping the wounded and which tortures nurses to make them say that they put their hands into wounds and pull apart. And the explanation for that, of course, is the regime was using dum-dum bullets on their own population. People like you are a disgrace to this world. In no way can you justify the positions that you take, that you have taken, and I suggest that you take retirement pension and get out.
Rodney, can I say something to that? Nothing I have said here is without evidence or backing, independent backing and evidence. I am sorry if I'm presenting facts that do not agree with your narrative and your understanding of the situation on the ground. I do apologize that the situation on the ground here in Bahrain is not as simple and not as black and white as you have come to understand it. I am doing my best here to present context to a very complicated situation, to present the truth from independent sources. I've cited the Independent Commission's report, whose members of the Commission have their credentials are impeccable, and their independence and credibility is beyond doubt. I've presented you testimony from the Danish ambassador and the BBC, And, when commenting on Abdul Hawaja's case, I cited the independent report written by two doctors, one of them Danish. If you would like to look up the credentials of those people, the Danish doctor is called Dr. J.J. Den Otter. So please do not dismiss my views as lies or propaganda when I'm doing my best here to portray a complete and accurate picture.
So Farhad Abdul Hadi's family and lawyer were lying when they said that he was drugged, strapped to a bed and force-fed.
This testimony did not come from Abdul Hadi al-Khawaja himself. It's important that there were many rumors circulating, many rumors regarding his force feeding, many rumors came about regarding his death. This is why we've allowed the Danish ambassador to visit him regularly. This is why his family visits him regularly, and this is why an independent report was published recently, made available online on the Bahrain news agency's website, with the doctor's signature and their original report. I mean, it's important not to rely on misinformation and exaggeration and take that as a reliable source of information. It is always important to take these things at least with a grain of salt.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm James Reinl, and we're taking a look at the pro-democracy movement in Bahrain. I'm joined by Farhad al-Banali, spokesman for the Bahrain government, Rodney Shakespeare, chairman of the Committee Against Torture in Bahrain, Mike Dibble, a Middle East pro-democracy campaigner, Ben Harris-Quinney, chairman of the conservative think tank The Bow Group, and Patrick Henningsen from the alternative news website InfoWars. At this stage, and we're kind of running out of time here, I'd like to look at the broader political situation in which Bahrain sits. The way that I described it earlier is that it's sandwiched between a Sunni-dominated Saudi Arabia and a Shia-dominated Iran. And maybe, Ben, I can turn to you at this stage. What are the political ramifications for Bahrain living in this kind of situation?
Well, I think it's very interesting what Farhad was saying earlier, that he doesn't believe in foreign intervention in these cases. And when he was talking about the makeup of the police force in Bahrain, because of course Saudi forces did come in to Bahrain to intervene, and I think there is clear linkage there between the Saudi royal family, their demographic, or the Saudi ruling classes, their demographic, and the Bahraini ruling classes as well. Clearly, they are set against the regime in Iran, as many Western powers are also. But in that region, it's more about the demographic shift, the Sunni and Shia clash, I think.
Patrick, can you add anything there?
If you've ever been to any of the Gulf states, they exist on a very thin veneer of civilization. It's a two-tiered system. You have the ruling class, and you have the money that comes in from Europe. So it's an offshore destination, and it's also a military strategic point. Okay. Now, the thing with Bahrain in particular, they serve at the pleasure of the Anglo-American Empire, and the Anglo-American Empire made them and can throw them under the bus if it's convenient for them. So like I said before, and I don't care which way the government spokesperson here spins it, as long as they toe the line with British and American foreign policies, and as far as buying arms and so forth, and also toe the line OPEC-wise, as long as Bahrain leadership toes these lines, they will do whatever they want to their people, and the world couldn't give a damn. Neither could the Western media. They really don't care. They only the Western media, and I don't blame Farhad for taking his position because he's doing his job. The Western media only takes an interest when the Foreign Office or when the State Department in Washington tells them to take an interest. That's the reality of it. We can debate all we want about it, but we know who really runs the Gulf in terms of who carries the biggest stick, and that's the United States and Britain.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's right about the media coverage. I mean, we've had an awful lot of media coverage on the Arab Spring in general, and particularly in the last few months on Bahrain. It's been absolutely across all of our medias, and I include mainstream media in that, and I don't think that's taking a line from the Foreign Office. I think that's just responsible journalism.
BBC talking points come straight out of the Foreign Office because half the people in the highest editorial positions in the BBC also get another paycheck from the MI5.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily true, but there are also a wide range.
True. That's
there are a wide range of media sources coming out of Bahrain.
Bahrain is
just let me weigh in here. I mean, the person just described the circumstances circumstances here and how people live. You might not go with the British media, but I'll tell you something from one of the harshest critics we've had. Nick Christoph has stated in an article that he acknowledged that we have a growing economy here that have actually gained growth during the financial crisis. He said that Bahrain has a large, well-educated middle class. Bahrain has a lot of empowered women, many of them serving in parliament and in leadership positions. I mean, to kind of marginalize all this and kind of label us as this stereotypical far-off, Arab monarchy regime, oil regime, is almost comical. I mean, there are a lot of things here happening. There are a lot of reforms. Listen, I'll tell you something. The Bahrain Independent Commission's report, which many call damning to the government, is available online. What the government has done in terms of reform is also available online. Tell me that this is not significant, that anyone interested in Bahrain, citizen or otherwise, can go look up what has been recommended, look up what has been done, and hold for himself the government accountable.
But it's not a proper democracy, though, is it? Proper democracy.
Oh, there is democracy. The House of Representatives just refused a decree by law from the king. It's important to understand that our democracy is new. We've just transitioned 3 years ago. Our parliament is on its third term. If you say there is a lack of democracy, the opposition has had a majority in the lower house each term it has sat in. If that is not democratic, I don't know what is.
Okay, Fahad, thank you for that. We're really running out of time, so I'm just going to let Mike get one more comment in.
Bahrain's suffering from a crisis of legitimacy. The only way that it can be solved, in my view at least, is through some kind of internationally supervised reconciliation process. BICI perhaps is a start. I don't doubt the reputation of the people who are involved in it. It was surprisingly strong in its findings, incredibly weak in its recommendations. I don't believe the regime has been very good even in following those up, and quite arguably BICI was started simply to stymie a UN-led process. So I can't see a solution really unless there is some kind of international oversight.
That was Mike Dibble, the pro-democracy campaigner, saying the only way to end the Bahrain uprising is for an internationally supervised reconciliation process. I was also joined by Fahad Al-Banali, a spokesman for the Bahrain government, Rodney Shakespeare, chairman of the Committee Against Torture in Bahrain, Ben Harris-Quinney, chairman of the conservative think tank, the Bow Group, and Patrick Henningsen from the alternative news website InfoWars. You're listening to the Voice of Russia in London. I'm James Reinl, and that brings to an end our discussion on Bahrain, the tiny island Gulf kingdom that has been the scene of ongoing violence and protests for more democracy. We are always interested in finding out what our listeners think about the show. We'd particularly like to hear your ideas about what tough topics should be discussed in our studios. To send us your ideas, comments and suggestions, why not email us on uk@ruvr.ru. That's uk@ruvr.ru. You're listening to the Voice of Russia in London. I'm James Reinl. Stay with us for the latest update on what's making headlines around the world.